Okay, welcome everyone to our next installment of Core Ecclesiae. And today is a bit of a hodgepodge because we have a bit to catch up on, and there have been so many things that have unfolded over the last few weeks. And I want to start, and I'm going to comment myself because our friend Charlie Gillespie is unavailable for the shoot, but I'm going to fit in for him if I can, in part, and be a direct participant in the conversation. But I'm going to start it off by asking some of the questions. And I want to go to one that I think you raised, first of all, Dan. I think it's an important one. We now know something about the travel agenda of Pope Leo for this year. I mean, he's going to Monaco. Looks like he's going to Spain, and very likely he may end up in Peru. He's negotiating that at this particular point, but he's not coming to the United States. Should we read something into this?
Absolutely. Um, and I think there's a few different dynamics to this. So there's been a lot of disappointment because this is the 250th anniversary of the United States, right? And the longest lasting constitutional democracy. Obviously, in currently in a crisis of that democracy, which is precisely, I think, one of the reasons that Leo is deciding to stay away. So a lot of people have compared the potential of coming here to when John Paul II came to Poland shortly after being elected Pope, right? And the way that that kind of galvanized opposition to the communist regime in that country. But I think there are a few important differences. One, Karol Wojtyła was a national figure in Poland before becoming Pope. So he was somebody who already had a natural audience in the country who knew him, knew his perspective. Whereas Prevost was not a well-known American figure before becoming Pope. And also in the media environment and landscape of the United States right now, I think there's a danger that if the Pope were to come here, which requires, right, being greeted by and meeting with various people from the presidential administration right ahead of the midterm elections in November, because any visit probably would have been in like October, especially because if he wanted to come for the UN, that would be in late September. And I think he clearly had a desire to come to the UN. He clearly has an admiration for Paul VI's speech in 1965. But that would have been seen and as validating the administration, particularly because anything he actually said would have been kind of filtered out through media spin, right? The amount of people listening to any given homily or speech as a proportion of the country would have been significantly lower than in the John Paul II example I cited a minute ago. And so I think he's deciding to see how things play out, to work through intermediaries. I'm sure we'll get to Cardinal Supich's letter about President Trump's social media posts last week. I think that's a clear example of working through an intermediary on an important issue. And also, I think realizing that certainly he was elected as an American Pope for this American moment, but not in a way that commemorating the 250th anniversary of the country in that way would necessarily work well with. Um, that kind of thing, in fact, would be more characteristic of a sort of non-American admirer of America, somebody like John Paul II.
Yeah.
You could easily see coming to commemorate the 250th. But in
Okay.
this environment, yes. So I'm wrapping up. In this environment and with this American, I think that's less advisable.
Okay, Michelle.
So, yeah, I think all that Dan said is accurate, but I'm not sure that Leo had America on his agenda from the get-go. I mean, my recollection is that, yes, he wanted to go to South America. He talked about Spain, and he doesn't want to be seen, as you pointed out, Dan, he doesn't want to be perceived, even though he is an American, and he says that. He's not an American pope, he's a global pope. And I think that that's an important thing for him. The other thing, Dan, that you alluded to is, and I think it's true, he has his spokespersons here. He has McElroy, he has Supich, he has Tobin. Now he has that most recent remark from Weissenberger, I think. And so these folks are talking about what is happening in America or what America is doing internationally, and he doesn't have to come to America to do that. Plus, I don't think popes usually come during an election year. They don't come in the middle of that time, and that would be difficult for him as pope. So, um, I'm in some ways I'm not surprised that he's not coming to America this year, and I think that he will come here, but I think he is being strategic and as he is and careful and choosing where he's going to go. He's already said he wanted to go to Africa, he wanted to go to Peru, and those are the places that he's selecting right now.
Popes generally, when they're elected, go back to their home country. We already saw that with Wojtyła. We saw it with Ratzinger, of course. We did not see it with Francis. Bergoglio did not go back to Argentina. He went to contiguous countries, went to Chile and whatever, but he did not go to Argentina proper. The reasons are largely political. In my sense, the reason here is political as well. Let's face it. He has to carefully consider how best to approach this. First of all, if it's a pastoral visit, the invitation must come from the Conference of Catholic Bishops. If it's a state visit, it has to be in conjunction with the White House. So there is the bishop's role and there's the role of the current U.S. administration. In both cases, they're fractious entities. His coming to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country would make a lot of sense in many ways, but it coming into a deeply divided and deeply polarized country where he could be quickly co-opted does seem to me something on the horizon that his advisors, particularly the Secretary of State, would be most cautious about. So we won't see him on American soil in 2026. We'll have to wonder if that's going to happen in 2027. As I said with Pope Francis, it never happened at all in its entire duration. It was difficulty with the Kirchners, but it was also difficult with subsequent presidents as well. So it has a political component, always does. But I want to ask this question. This was going to be a little later, but I think Dan raised it now, so this is the right point to bring it up. The 250th anniversary. Well, one of the things we've noticed is they're moving on the beatification of Fulton J. Sheen. And listening to one of his successors in the propagation of faith, or whatever they call it now, Monsignor Landry, on one of your major networks, NBC or CBS, I think, he made it very clear that this was a sop. Oh, sop isn't the right good. A gift by a guy from Illinois, Robert Prevost, to a guy from Illinois, Fulton Sheen. And so this was an important moment in American Catholic history because it was showcasing a bishop saint at a time that the country is celebrating its 250th anniversary. Now, in the interview, it was both maudlin, over the top, it seemed to me, and largely inaccurate, but it was spin. But there's a good deal of truth in what he was saying. Why do you think the Fulton Sheen candidacy for sainthood is now moved on to approval for beatification when there were so many problems from the outset? Any reaction to that? Dan, I think this was one of the things you also wanted to consider in today's platform.
Yeah, so the timing of the announcement was fascinating. So it literally was announced the first business day after the retirement of Cardinal Dolan. And I think that is not coincidental at all. So the beatification had been announced previously and was then held up because of a dispute over the body of Fulton Sheen, right, and also some other issues that were not mentioned. Some of it seemed to have been related to stuff about his handling of sexual abuse cases while he was Bishop of Rochester toward the end of his life. But the fact that Cardinal Dolan retired on Friday and was replaced by an archbishop from Illinois, Ronald Hicks, right, and then suddenly the next business day, right, they announce that Fulton Sheen is going to be beatified tells me that Dolan's presence, either directly or indirectly, was likely blocking the beatification from moving forward.
Ah,
And we've seen this before. So most famously, right, with Oscar Romero, right, where John Paul II was frosty in some ways toward Romero, although he visited Romero's tomb in 1984 when he visited El Salvador against the wishes of the Salvadoran bishops. But in Latin America, he appointed conservative bishops and he got conservative results in the sense that those bishops blocked any kind of beatification of Romero because there is a kind of local oversight to that in terms of causes, because canonization goes, are supposed to spring up from
yeah,
devotion in the country where the person's from. So if the bishops of the country or the conference don't want it, it tends not to happen.
that's right.
So in this case, Dolan is the senior cardinal in the United States and the bishop of one of the places where Sheen served and had been involved in the beatification case. So it seems as if he was blocking it and that his retirement has unblocked it. So I'll leave it at that. But I think for myself, but I think that's the most interesting aspect of this in the short term. We can comment more on the character of Sheen and all that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I wanted to ask that question. Why do you think he was blocking it?
Well, I think if I can insert myself into this, and I'm
Sure.
sure Dan is aware of this, there are controversies swirling about around Sheen anyway. Some of it emanating from a biography of Cardinal Spellman that occurred many years ago, in which various things or allegations were raised about his relationship with Sheen. In addition, his transfer or translation from New York to the bishopric in Rochester was also not without controversy. Partly, again, it speaks to his temperament. There are many people who find Sheen's performative catechesis appealing, and in the 1950s, early 1960s, I suspect that that was true. But he represents a certain kind of apologist, a certain kind of media personality that's had its day, although it appears to be resurfacing again in some quarters. But it always struck me that he was a bit of a popinjay, actually, and that his own personal vanity often got in the way of the kinds of things one would look for in someone in a candidate for sainthood. At the same time, having said this, there is no question he did a lot of good work, especially in collaboration with the brilliant Canadian Armenian photographer Joseph Karsh. They published several volumes of photographs covering the Holy Land and many other places. Their pact or their friendship was well known. But he's a controversial figure in some respects, and I would think Dan may be right. It may be Dolan, successor to Spellman by a few bishops, of course, but a successor to Spellman. But also, it may be anxiety around some of the swirling gossip, maybe more than anything else, but still nonetheless. So you got to remember the church has never fully recovered from the accelerated canonization of the founder of Opus Dei, Escriva y Balaguer. This was a complicated and hastened canonization. Kenneth Woodward has done great work on this, but I think it makes bishops very cautious on how they proceed with any candidate that may have even a smidgen of a hint of scandal. So I'm surprised that it's been reopened. And Dan may be entirely right, maybe entirely episcopal politics. But I wonder if there's also not some other considerations. But now that it's on the way to beatification, those earlier anxieties probably have been solved by the Vatican authorities. Anyway, Michelle, what were you going to say?
No, I was not aware of some of the controversy, but I think it's interesting. I'd like us to talk a little bit about Hicks if we're ready to,
Sure,
because
absolutely.
it's interesting that you know it, that Hicks happens at the moment that they're opening up opportunity, the beatification for Sheehan, but Hicks is really noteworthy. I mean, if we've been following the things that he's been talking about, I think the evening before his installation, he gave a talk, and he's really quoting practically Francis saying, "Todos, todos, everyone is included," right? He's called himself a shepherd, a pastor, not a CEO. And he's talked about how he sees himself as the archbishop of over 2 million Catholics in the archdiocese, right? And I think that this is a moment for the Catholic Church, another big moment for the Catholic Church. And yes, we've already talked about that Hicks comes from the south side of Chicago, like Leo. Supich, in fact, I think, consecrated him as bishop. Um, he also spent time in El Salvador, and Oscar Ramirez, he said, is his favorite saint. But one of the things I read and loved very much, in one of his opening homilies, he quoted Bad Bunny.
Yeah.
And and but I think that what he is saying is he understands the culture, not just it's not it's about the church sort of opening itself and embracing and really being in New York and in America in a different way. I think he's a young man, the way Leo is a young man. And I think strategic and cautious like Leo, although he has a lot of bright energy about him. But I think that this is a moment for the Catholic Church. Dan, what are you thinking about Hicks?
So I'll mention that he also quoted Billy Joel, which I commented was a new moment in the reception of Nostra Aetate. But I think the most important line and takeaway line in his homily at his installation mass was that we are a missionary church, not a country club, right? And that was very much in keeping with Pope Francis. His language was deeply saturated in Francis, and certainly he is going to be the most pastorally inclined Archbishop of New York, I think, since Cardinal Cook, Terence Cardinal Cook, who was bishop in the 1970s and early 80s between Spellman and O'Connor. Right, New York has always been a fairly conservative archdiocese institutionally, and I think that he will have more pastoral energy in terms of ministering to the people. He celebrated daily mass at St. Patrick's yesterday. I said he hopes to do that with some frequency. So I think that kind of accessibility is something that's going to be a priority. And again, in the United States, the Archbishop of New York is the most visible bishop in the country, no matter who it is on some level, right? There are some people like Cardinal Egan who have kind of shrank the role by virtue of their lack of charisma and personality. But generally speaking, alongside the president of the USCCB, and often even more so, right, they serve an informal role as being a leader. And Archbishop Hicks is somebody who I think wants to embrace that and to do that in a very different way than Cardinal Dolan did, which was very much geared toward the wealthy and very much friendly to conservative political interests.
Yeah,
What you said there is right, and it is an implicit, perhaps even explicit critique of his predecessor's preferences. But what I want to do now, since we've identified Hicks as a leader, and you have done that, and so has Michelle, I want to go to just a brief paragraph, read it to you, from our friend Cardinal McElroy's address to the presidents of the Catholic colleges and universities in the United States and Canada, which he gave recently in Washington on the order of grace versus the order of nature. Actually, it was the homily at the Mass. And he says the following: as a society, and he's speaking specifically about the United States, We have allowed a Hobbesian conception of the world to dominate vital elements of our policymaking and public conversation. Principles of human dignity and compassion are discarded in favor of a calculus that values the acquisition of wealth, military power, and the stoking of racial, ethnic, and economic divisions. End of quote. It's a powerful paragraph. We know who he's talking about, and we know what he's talking about. What's Hicks's role going to be in that? You want to elaborate a little further, or Michelle, do you want to come in on that?
Well,
Yes,
I
he is
think
the
that's
senior prelate in the United States in terms of influence, no question, but he's not a cardinal. He is new, relatively unknown, actually, in the global world. Now that's changing. What role is he going to play, keeping in mind what Cardinal McElroy has exhorted uh, fellow bishops to take a
well,
prophetic leadership in?
I mean, I think, when Dan pulled out that quote, he wants the church to be a missionary church. He is going to reach out. He's also talked about, I think what I was trying to get at when I said he used the Bad Bunny quote in his homily, and he speaks in Spanish. He gives his
Yes,
homilies, etc., in Spanish.
yes.
He's embracing that whole Latino, Latina, Hispanic culture, in New York, all semblances of it. And I think, that speaks to the kind of leader and what he's going to do. And that's very different from what Dolan was doing. And it's very much in order of what McElroy is talking about. McElroy, said the counter to, the paragraph you read, the counter to this power, dominance, acquisition of wealth are the Beatitudes. And um, and Hicks has, talked about the importance of bringing the gospel message. He wants the gospel to be brought out. I see him as being very much in line with what McElroy is talking about. And, I think what I was saying before, and, he is going to, because he is a leader of the most important church, if you will, in America, I think he's going to make a big difference. It's going to be a moment for the Catholic Church.
Well, how does this fit, Dan, with the installation of the new Archbishop of Denver, Goka? Is this a part of a similar pattern where you're getting bishops of a more flexible and Bergoglio mind post Bergoglio?
So I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in Denver. So, um, Denver is a bit underrated in some ways as a see, in the sense of, right. It's not. It's an area with quite a number of Catholics and quite a diverse amount of Catholics. There are a number of Hispanic Catholics who've been there for many years, right, owing to its proximity to the Southwest. But it's most important as the epicenter of kind of conservative Catholic institutions in the United States, right? Northern Virginia and Denver are both places that are really crawling with these conservative institutions and institutes, and a lot of conservative money flowing through. Um, that archdiocese has also become the epicenter of a number of priests with questionable practices surrounding exorcisms and things like this, who have been harbored by the previous Archbishop, Samuel Aquila, despite numerous complaints coming in of people who have been spiritually abused. Um, so Bishop Golka is going to come in with a major set of issues, and that's a place where it's going to require delicate handling. Anybody who comes in with guns blazing there will find themselves all over the place, much like Bishop Martin in Charlotte, who has been pushing back against traditionalist young priests in his diocese, has received huge pushback due to the way that the media, conservative media, inflates all kinds of things. But again, having somebody who is more of in line with the current and previous pontificate in Denver is hugely important, as far as kind of when the rubber hits the road of what people are experiencing in their parishes from people who come to be directors of religious education and all this, right? Because many of them are coming through formation with the kind of institutes that are based out of Denver. And if that message shifts, that will be enormously important. But again, Archbishop Golka is going to have a lot on his hands, especially with some of these priests and with some of the kind of messaging coming out of various things there. There have been some criticism that he tolerated some of this in Colorado Springs as bishop there. I think you can give him a bit of a pass on that, just in the sense that he was there as a suffragan bishop to Denver. And so, and many of those things are really kind of supported by the Archbishop of Denver. But now that he's going to be the Archbishop of Denver, he really needs to start to clean up the mess there. Because again, it's such an influential place that for a while, there was a group of bishops who were nicknamed the Denver Mafia.
Oh, yeah.
Because of their opposition to Francis. Many of them were the bishops who grew beards, sort of like playoff beards in hockey that they were going to shave when Pope Francis died.
That's right.
He ended up outlasting the beards.
Now, was that where Cardinal Stafford was at one point?
Yeah, so Denver became this epicenter of conservatism through Archbishop, then Cardinal Stafford, and particularly World Youth Day in 1993 in Denver is a watershed moment for conservative Catholicism in the U.S., particularly for the sort of evangelical Catholic subculture. Because remember, Colorado Springs, where Golka's coming from, is a major center of U.S. evangelicalism.
Yes.
So, there is a lot of interchange and interplay there. But the last thing I'll say about Bishop Golka is that up until he became a bishop of Colorado Springs 5 years ago, he had been in parishes his entire career. And I think that's really important, that here is somebody with the smell of the sheep, in the sense of he's been with the people day to day. He obviously served on other committees and stuff. He did other work for the bishops, but he was in a parish. He was not in Rome. He was not in Washington. He was in a parish with the people for his entire priesthood.
That's a good point. Just before we get to Michelle's reaction here, just building on what you've just said, Dan, I looked at the background material, the bios of Golka and Hicks, and the dominant note is, of course, their pastoral dimension, which is admirable. In recent years, appointments to sees, whether metropolitan or an appointment as an auxiliary or whatever, were often driven by candidates who had at least a canon law background, but not much more than that. I remember Cardinal Danillo's of Belgium, one occasion, not excoriating, but scolding Catholic University presidents when we were gathered in Washington about the fact that with over 300 bishops in the United States, there wasn't one who was an intellectual. Well, that's changed, obviously, because people have people like McElroy in that position now. But the over the years, particularly during the post-Jadot, post-Paul VI appointments, we ended up with a number of bishops who were fundamentally managers. And Francis has tried to shift that to bishops who are fundamentally pastoral, hence the smell of the sheep. Do you see with either of these appointments or subsequent appointments anyone being identified as a significant intellectual leader of the Catholic Church in the United States? Because Cardinal McElroy is of advanced years, and who's going to replace him?
Who will replace McElroy?
Yeah, who's on the horizon to replace him as an intellectual, not as a Bishop of Washington? That's my concern.
Dan, do you have some thoughts on that?
I think so. This is pointing to a deeper problem, that as you have fewer priests, the kind of intellectual formation involved, to become someone like Cardinal McElroy is often not available, because frankly, bishops don't get permission as frequently to go get advanced degrees to diocesan priests, because they need them to be serving in parishes and serving in the chancery. So I think this points to kind of a broader problem. If you're going to have intellectual bishops, you're going to have to start ordaining religious. Frankly, they're running out too. The Jesuits are running out of candidates to be university presidents. But frankly, bishops from religious orders like the Jesuits, like the Congregation of Holy Cross, are likely to have a stronger intellectual formation, even if they're not intellectuals as such. than diocesan clergy, right? Diocesan seminary intellectual formation has gotten very poor, not because the professors are poor in many cases, often because the students don't take it that seriously and the bishops let them get away with it because they need the men.
That's true.
Emphasis on men.
Yeah.
And so I think, and what I would add also, though, to your previous point, that in addition to being managers, you also had a lot of bishops who were culture warriors. And I think even more than managers, that was something that Francis was concerned to root out. And the Denver Mafia were culture warriors more than they were managers. And so, yeah, I think the pastors instead of culture warriors has been the watchword.
Okay, Michelle, want to weigh in on this?
Well, I just think it's been talked about quite a lot, the importance of the formation of the seminarians. And, Dan's right that maybe the professors aren't poor, but the education that they're receiving in general, and where are they receiving that education and that formation. And so that's a whole bigger question. I think that in fact, wasn't that one of the documents that came out of the synod on synodality, a question about the need to look at the formation and the revision of seminarian formations? Was
Yes, it did. It did surface. You're quite right. And even more importantly, there was a study group, one of the 10, now I think 12 study groups that were set up, where we're to look rather closely at the how bishops were appointed, the qualities of that we need in the candidates and the manner of their appointment. And we should talk about that topic as when it's released more formally and in a greater depth as we move through these years of implementation of the final report on synodality. And that reminds me, we'll do something on synod and synodality in a coming program. And we'll do something which has surfaced just a little obliquely today, but I think is a very important point. And that is the challenge that Leo's going to have to face, or is indeed already facing, with regard to the resurgence of energy and boldness by the priestly society of St. Pius X, where the leaders are now moving to consecrate their own bishops, raising the problem that both Benedict and John Paul II wrestled with, and not particularly successfully, that Francis has a slightly different take on it, maybe, than Leo is now evolving. Leo seems to be a little harder on it, but it's potential schism, right? And so here at the beginning of the pontificate, we have the St. Pius X group, founded by Archbishop Lefebvre in the early 1970s, as a reaction in many ways to the council itself. But that's a program in its entirety that we won't have any other topic. We're wrapping up now in our 30 minutes, and I enjoyed my time with, and I hope you have, with Michelle Loris and Dan Rober of the Department of Catholic Studies at Sacred Heart University. And this is Cor Ecclesiae from the heart of the church, and our now bi-monthly half-hour podcast. Thanks for tuning in.